In breaking news, a 14-year-old boy killed in a sword attack in Hainaut yesterday has been named as Daniel Anjorin. A 36-year-old man remains in custody after being arrested on suspicion of murder.
It started like any ordinary morning, calm and mundane, but in minutes, it became a waking nightmare. A man lost in drugs, delusions, and violence tore through a quiet neighborhood with a sword, leaving death, blood, and broken lives in his wake. A teenager gone before he even had a chance, families shattered, and heroes left fighting for their lives. How does someone's mind descend into such darkness? And why do the innocent always pay the price? Daniel grew up in East London in the kind of household that made other families slightly resentful. His parents didn't just love him, they gushed. His smile wasn't just cheerful, it apparently had the power to illuminate rooms, awaken flowers, and probably make pigeons bow. Teachers called him gifted, which is British for actually scary smart, especially when he consistently got top grades while somehow managing to master piano and still explain quantum mechanics to his younger siblings without breaking a sweat. Arsenal Football Club, obsessed. His bedroom looked less like a teen's room and more like a museum dedicated to the religion of Arsenal.
This is the moment that the police caught the man who took the life of 14-year-old Daniel Anjorin.
Daniel had the kind of life that you're supposed to appreciate in hindsight, knowing that someday reality has a way of delivering the sharpest knife through the gut when you least expect it. It was a perfectly ordinary morning on the 30th of April, 2024. Daniel had his headphones on, blissfully unaware of the horrors about to unfold. People were walking their dogs, waiting for the tube, sipping lukewarm coffee, all doing the boringly normal things that make life feel steady and predictable. Then came 6:45 a.m., the moment when London's suburban calm decided it was done playing nice. A gray Ford Transit van decided that roads were overrated and smashed through a garden fence, its engine revving like a caged lion. In its path was Donato, a 33-year-old man whose morning walk just became a physics lesson in human fragility. Donato was hurled into someone's garden, a human projectile in the most horrifying way possible. And then it got worse. Because of course it did. The driver, bleeding and dazed, wasn't interested in apologizing. He was wearing a yellow hoodie and had apparently been thinking, you know what would really spice up a Monday? A samurai sword. Which is exactly what he pulled out, because apparently London suburbia had suddenly been cast in an action movie, directed by someone with zero concern for reality. Donato, still recovering from being used as a crash test dummy, found himself facing an actual 60-centimeter blade. The man yelled, swung, and sliced. Oh, just a tiny nick. No, a deep cut, because understatement would ruin the whole scene. Donato survived, obviously, but only by millimeters. Every instinct screamed run, every heartbeat counted, and every step became a gamble between existence and oblivion. Seconds stretched like hours as he scrambled away, clutching his neck and fighting the rising tide of panic and pain. The world had already shifted. Nothing would ever feel ordinary again. Meanwhile, the attacker seemed to find delight in the chaos he had created. One victim was not enough. One act of violence was merely a prelude, a testing of his own limits, or perhaps the city's. Marcus Monzo wanted more. He wanted terror. He wanted confusion. He wanted to watch the carefully constructed routines of suburban life dissolve into screams, shattered fences, and pools of crimson that reflected the morning sun like a grotesque mirror. And that's when Daniel, poor oblivious Daniel, walked straight into the nightmare. Earbuds stuffed in, music blasting, footsteps steady, completely unaware that his life was about to be violently rewritten. He moved forward as if the morning were just another scene in the endless monotony of daily life. Neighbors erupted into frantic motion, yelling, waving, pointing, shouting warnings that bounced off Daniel's headphones like they were invisible. Every frantic gesture was met with nothing. Every desperate attempt to intervene was ignored, unseen. The universe, with cruel sense of timing, had placed him directly in the path of absolute chaos. Marcus Monso, moving with the eerie confidence of someone who had rehearsed this in the theater of his mind, spotted the boy. He advanced with quiet menace, like a predator closing on prey that doesn't even know it's being hunted. There was no hesitation, no flicker of doubt, just the cold execution of violence he had spent years imagining, planning, and obsessing over. And then the strike. The swing of the katana was sudden, precise, devastating. Daniel didn't register the movement. One moment he was thinking about piano practice, about the next match for Arsenal, about the small joys that made life feel manageable. And the next, he was on the pavement, a pool of blood forming beneath him. A lunge, a slash, a stab, an unrelenting barrage that ripped through muscle, cartilage, and hope alike. The injuries were not survivable. They were designed by circumstance and intention to ensure finality. Daniel's fall was not just physical, it was a rupture of the ordinary, a brutal reminder that safety is an illusion, that youth, talent, and promise are no shields against pure, unmitigated horror. The street, once filled with normal morning activity, the distant hum of cars, the chatter of neighbors, the faint cries of birds, was now a scene of unspeakable carnage. Each second stretched, each heartbeat of witnesses a reminder that lives could be destroyed in the time it takes to tie a shoelace. Daniel lay there, barely conscious, as the attacker considered the street his stage, moving on with eerie intent to find more victims, more chaos, more proof of the depth of his own darkness. And in that moment, every element of suburban normality, the fences, the neatly trimmed lawns, the idle morning chatter, became part of a grotesque theater. The ordinary had collapsed under the weight of violence, leaving nothing but blood, confusion, and grief in its wake.
At just over 12 hours ago, as the day began, as tables were being laid for breakfast, horrific scenes began to play out in the front gardens here. A commotion because a man wielding a sword was running amok. And as you mentioned, a schoolboy, just 14 years old, on his way to school, was fatally stabbed. Police were on the scene within minutes. They pursued the alleged assailant through alleyways and back gardens before tasering him and arresting him on suspicion of murder.
As if the chaos hadn't reached its peak, Marcus vanished for a moment, slipping behind the hedges as though the suburban gardens were some personal stage. Whether he paused to gather his thoughts or simply to savor the terror he had unleashed, no one could say. When he returned, he didn't waste a second. The ambulance, a symbol of hope and life itself, became another target. Paramedics, confronted with a blood-soaked man wielding a lethal weapon, prudently prioritized their own survival, retreating to a safe distance while the screams of the wounded filled the air. Then came PC Yasmin Mekim Whitfield, one of those rare people whose instinct to act surpasses self-preservation. She knelt beside the teenager, trying to provide aid, to stabilize what little chance remained. Marcus saw her and treated her presence not as an obstacle but as a challenge. His movements became almost ritualistic in their savagery. Every swing, every strike carried a weight of malice, precision, and total disregard for human life. The blade tore through the air and collided with flesh and bone, leaving fractures, deep lacerations, and a chaos of blood in its wake. Yasmin, exposed and vulnerable, fought to shield herself, realizing quickly that the attacker's intent was not subtle not hesitant. Pure devastation. Into this maelstrom stepped Inspector Malloy Campbell, armed with only a baton, an object laughably inadequate against a 60-centimeter sword. Yet Campbell hurled himself into the storm, prioritizing the life of his fallen colleague over his own. The blade caught him, slashing through hand and arm, tearing tendons, fracturing bones, drawing blood that mingled with the street. Still, his intervention created a critical distraction, buying precious seconds. Officers flooded the scene, surrounding Marcus from every angle, their arrival signaling that his reign of terror could no longer continue unchecked. Each movement, each choice on that street was a terrifying calculus between survival and duty, courage and carnage, in a morning that had long since lost any claim to normalcy. By now, Marcus had proven he wasn't just violent, he was inventive. He fled through gardens, jumped fences, and barged into a home with a 4-year-old child inside. Because that's exactly what sane people do when cornered. They break into family bedrooms swinging swords. Henry Polania, the resident, became a real-life superhero that day. He shielded his partner and child, taking deep cuts himself, all while Marcus apparently auditioned for the role of suburban nightmare incarnate. Eventually, Marcus ran out of ideas, or maybe adrenaline, and headed for the final act of his morning performance. The driveway showdown. Police tasers, multiple officers, repeated bursts, the kind of chaos that makes a calm person wonder whether the universe is auditioning for a horror remake. Finally, Marcus was subdued, handcuffed, and lying in the driveway surrounded by his own blood and that of others, muttering something between English and Spanish, presumably complaining about paperwork. Paramedics rushed to Daniel and the others, but Daniel's body refused the favor of survival. CPR, frantic compressions, desperate attempts to revive him, everything failed. Yasmin, Campbell, and Henry were treated as best they could, some bleeding heavily, yet clinging to a stubborn, fragile hope. Their minds no doubt wrestled with the absurdity of existence in what should have been an ordinary suburban morning. A teenager's life extinguished in seconds. 4 others gravely wounded, all because one man had fused untreated mental illness, escalating substance abuse, delusions, and a fascination with lethal weaponry into a single, unthinkable crescendo of violence. It almost defies comprehension. How does a person transform so completely? Marcus Monzo, a name now synonymous with horror, was born in Brazil, nurtured in a small, peaceful village, and seemed for years the embodiment of normalcy. Polite, adventurous, capable of friendly banter and encouragement, his youth hinted at nothing resembling the chaos he would later unleash. He could have been any teenager learning martial arts, trading playful blows and philosophical quips with friends, unaware of the darker impulses lurking decades ahead. But life, substances, and obsession conspired to rewrite the script. Fast forward 10 years, and Marcus had traded social charm for hallucinogenic experiments, psychedelic exploration, and an unrelenting dive into radical ideologies. What began as casual cannabis use spiraled into relentless dependency, consuming his days with paranoia, disorientation, and intense, altered states. LSD and psilocybin became daily companions, and far-right content, misogynistic, conspiratorial, violent, dominated his online life. Somewhere along this spiral, fascination with historical weapons grew into a practical collection of swords, each one meticulously acquired and maintained, each a tool of the dark fantasies he was now entertaining. Japanese katanas arrived in his home as casually as someone orders groceries, their sharp edges quietly signaling the destruction to come. By the morning of April 30th, 2024, Marcus Monzo was no longer a man. He was a vessel for violence, a nightmare animated by substances, paranoia, and delusion, ready to descend upon an unsuspecting neighborhood with consequences no one could have imagined. Even as his origins seem distant and almost absurd, the transformation is chillingly real. From a polite youth practicing jujitsu to a man capable of turning a quiet street into a scene of unimaginable horror. The trajectory is a slow-motion unraveling of human potential, warped by addiction, radicalization, and unchecked obsession, a chain of events that ended with Daniel gone and a community forever scarred. Every step of Marcus's path, from small village boy to violent perpetrator, was a series of missed signs, of overlooked warning lights, of curiosity turned into calamity. And in that morning, the ordinary collided with the catastrophic in the most unforgiving way imaginable. He had delusions of grandeur, cosmic energy conspiracies, and apparently thought he could survive on air and sunlight alone. He killed his cat for spiritual reasons, which would be the most ridiculous footnote in the tragedy if it weren't such a glaring red flag. He isolated himself, grew increasingly paranoid, and obsessed over weapons, martial arts, and online extremist communities. And yes, he filmed himself with swords whispering ominously. If this sounds like a villain origin story from a poorly rated superhero movie, that's because reality sometimes doesn't bother with good storytelling. It just goes full horror, full batshit chaos. By April 30th, 2024, Marcus's delusions manifested violently. One man, armed with a sword and fueled by a cocktail of drugs and paranoia, turned a suburban street into an absolute war zone. The police had to face not just a criminal, but a fully armed, unpredictable, and unhinged force of nature. By May 1st, Marcus was charged with murder, attempted murder, grievous bodily harm, aggravated burglary, and possession of offensive weapons. Basically everything on the UK's absolutely do not do this list. The trial in June 2025 focused less on whether Marcus swung a sword, because obviously he did, and more on the existential question: was he mentally ill or just creatively deranged on a drug-fueled high? British law doesn't care if you were intoxicated when you committed murder. Psychosis from drugs, not a defense. Marcus's defense team tried the classic "he was psychotic" angle, claiming he had no memory and was following symbolic instructions from imaginary forces. The courtroom, meanwhile, could only react in horror, disbelief, and mild nausea. Daniel's family described the gaping hole left by his death, something that's hard to quantify unless you've ever had someone in your life whose absence instantly makes reality feel like a poorly written tragedy. The evidence? Unignorable. Body cam footage, witness testimony, video evidence of Marcus practicing with deadly weapons. The court saw that Marcus didn't stumble into chaos. He meticulously prepared. He read extremist material, obsessed over assassins, crafted a fantasy identity as a master, and filmed himself handling weapons. And somewhere in all of this, he had been walking around London with the corpse of his cat in a van. Did anyone notice? Apparently not until it was too late. After 3 weeks of courtroom horror, Marcus Monzo was found guilty on all counts. Sentencing came, and the judge handed down life imprisonment with a minimum term of 40 years. Not just serve time, but the kind of sentence designed to make even the most imaginative villain origin story seem underwhelming. Marcus, now behind bars under high security, would be monitored for mental health concerns. But one suspects that even the most meticulous surveillance couldn't undo the morning chaos he unleashed. The case sparked debates, predictably so, about mental health, drug addiction, weapon access, and the sheer luck involved in survival. Daniel's death left a mark on the community, a reminder that ordinary mornings can flip into nightmare scripts faster than anyone can say, "I should have stayed in bed." And somewhere in the undercurrent of society, questions remained. How did Marcus go unnoticed for so long? How many warning signs had people ignored because they were inconvenient or because they sounded too surreal to be real? Could we, as a society, prevent the next suburban horror story? Or was it only a matter of time before the next Marcus Monzo appeared, blending delusion, drugs, and accessible weaponry into a deadly cocktail? There's a cruel, almost cinematic irony here. Daniel, thriving, talented, kind, completely ordinary in all the best ways, was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Marcus, meanwhile, had been planning this insanity for years, quietly escalating from hallucinogens and cosmic energy obsessions to swords, videos, and violence. One teenager dead, 4 seriously injured, dozens traumatized, and it all happened before 7:15 a.m. Some mornings start with spilled coffee. This one started with blood and terror. It's tempting to look for answers in psychiatric evaluations, in police work, in social media monitoring, in drug rehabilitation, and in online sales restrictions for bladed weapons. And yet, the more you dig, the more it seems like life has a mischievous habit of ignoring logical contingencies. Marcus wasn't a monster born overnight. He was the slow, deliberate product of neglected warning signs, untreated mental health issues, and unmonitored delusions amplified by substances and internet rabbit holes. The question becomes, are we ever prepared to recognize the trajectory before the tragedy hits? Or do we wait until the streets are pools of blood and the news headlines make the rest of us recoil in horror? Consider this. Daniel could have been anyone's child, your neighbor's kid, the person walking to school thinking about music lessons or football matches. And Marcus could have been anyone else too, a person who chose a different path or one who slipped further down the rabbit hole without anyone noticing.
The name of that 14-year-old who was killed in that attack in Hainault was released by the police. It's Daniel Anjorin, and the police have released a picture of him as well. Let's bring in our correspondent Daniel Henry, who's at the scene for us now. So Daniel, we now know that 14-year-old's name, Daniel Anjorin.
That's right, and we now have an image of the young boy who was killed here just on his way to school.
The line between ordinary and horrific is thinner than most of us like to admit. And yet, there's a dark, almost absurd kind of pattern to it all. From Brazil to London, from polite youth to sword-wielding nightmare, Marcus's trajectory reads like a cautionary tale you'd see on a streaming platform. How drugs, delusions, and swords destroyed a suburb. Only in this story, there's no dramatic slow-mo or cinematic music. There's just Daniel and the others, and Marcus, and the sobering reality that real-life chaos doesn't bother with storytelling conventions. Even after the trial, after Marcus was locked away, after the press recounted the horror, the questions linger. How did someone so unhinged manage to acquire deadly weapons so easily? How could society have intervened? And perhaps most painfully, could Daniel still be alive if someone, anyone, had seen the signs, had acted differently, had shouted louder, had believed harder in prevention? This was a tragedy that combined ordinary human life and extraordinary malice in a way that left London reeling. It was a morning that promised nothing but routine and delivered devastation instead. The sobering reality is that Marcus Monzo wasn't an anomaly in the universe's sense. He was a predictable consequence of overlooked danger, addiction, untreated delusion, and the availability of lethal tools. And yet somewhere inevitably, another story waits. Somewhere another ordinary morning is ticking along, completely unaware of the potential for horror. The streets will fill with people listening to music, drinking coffee, walking to school, and the question will remain, when the next Marcus appears, will anyone notice the signs, Or will history's dark comedy repeat itself with the same merciless timing, turning someone else's life into a story like Daniel's? Because reality is just that cruel. It doesn't give warnings, it doesn't pause for contemplation, and it certainly doesn't apologize. The tragedy of Daniel Monzo isn't just about a day gone wrong. It's about how fragile ordinary life is in the face of compounded human failure, neglect, drugs, delusion, and the lethal intersection of accessible weapons with untreated mental illness. It's about the absurdity that someone who spent years being kind, talented, and promising could be erased in moments, while a person so profoundly broken could leave a trail of destruction across an unsuspecting city. And as you think about it, the question that sticks isn't why Marcus did it. The question is, how many warning signs are we willing to miss before another suburban nightmare repeats itself? How much cosmic irony can we tolerate before ordinary mornings are truly safe? Because for Daniel, that ordinary morning in East London didn't just go wrong. It ended.